I would just say that internships are short. And so you really want to make sure that you do two things. One, are as clear as you can be on what your own goals are out of the experience. And number two, that you hit the ground running.
Yeah, so today we have a special guest. Welcome Al, the founder of MBA School, Better Work Labs, and author of MBA Insider. Al, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. And thanks for giving me the chance to be here today. So, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of MBA School and the founder of Better Work Labs. And for however as long as I can remember, what I'm really been always really excited about is how do we help people learn and how do we help people do their best work? And I've been able to do this through my platform of MBA School, which is a place for MBA applicants and students to learn how to use their time in business school to grow their career. And now certainly through Better Work Labs as well, where I partner with organizations and leaders to develop learning and development programs to help their employees succeed in the workplace. And this has just been something I've always been super passionate about and excited about. I think that a job and a career is a great place to contribute and use your talents to contribute to something that's bigger than yourself. And I just firmly believe in providing as many resources and opportunities for people to tap into their purpose and potential, to do great work and to grow their careers, all while making contributions to the world that's bigger than themselves.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And before we jump into the actual topic, can you tell me a little bit about the book as well? I know you had this book, and then it's been something that a lot of the folks that have mentioning about, how to get to know about MBA and like what to expect before you get in. So I would love if you can share a little bit more about that too.
Absolutely. So I started my blog MBA School when I was an MBA student at UNC Kenan-Flagler back in 2014. Part of the reason why I did this was because I realized that after navigating through my time in business school, I was getting a lot of questions about the MBA experience I was going through and how I was thinking about using my MBA to grow my career. And I decided I just wanted to write more about the learnings I had and my own reflections on the topic. And slowly but surely, I realized that just me writing about this was good, but if I could get other people to share their own experiences, it could be even better. And so I started looping in my classmates, my friends, and fast forward a couple of years, and I had built a blog that had over a couple hundred articles and had thousands of visitors per month, all learning about how an MBA can grow their career and how to navigate through the MBA experience once you get there to achieve your career goals. So in about 2019, I decided to write a book, which you mentioned, which is MBA Insider, How to Make the Most of Your MBA Experience. And my desire to write this book really stemmed from all of the learnings I had from building MBA School and really addressing some of the key common questions around how does an MBA help me grow my career? If I go to business school, what do I need to do in order to prepare and be successful? And when I'm there, what are the areas I can focus on so that I make sure I get the most out of my experience? And I think one of the most fun parts of the book is that I feature over 60 plus student stories, all of diverse and unique backgrounds, sharing their tips, tricks, and lessons for how they made the most of their MBA experience. And I kind of like to think of MBA Insider as the book you read once you know you're going to business school, so you can get the most out of your MBA experience.
Yeah, check out that in the description below. So one of the most important parts of MBA is probably going to be your summer internship, and that's probably going to be the part that I want to spend most of the time today talking about. And I remember the session that you had when I was an MBA in UNC Kenan-Flagler, that you had this session about how to succeed in your summer internship. So that's why I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on like what's the best practices and what are some of the do's and don'ts and stuff like that going into your summer internship. So before we start, can I start with maybe asking you some general thoughts or general advice for those who are going into summer internship, as we're probably going to be seeing a lot of those LinkedIn notifications saying, hey, I got into this company, I'll be starting my summer internship and when. So I'd love to go from general advice for those who are going into internship, and then maybe go a little bit deeper as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the very first thing to start with is that one of the reasons why I started doing a lot of research on this topic and trying to help people on this topic is because one key insight I found was that so many people were spending a lot of time finding the right internship, preparing for their interviews, and putting in a lot of hard work in landing a summer internship. And that is well and good and super important. But so few people were actually thinking about, what can I do to set myself up so that I can actually be successful when I get there? Because after all, getting an internship is an accomplishment, yes, in and of itself, but that's only half the battle. And you have to show up in order to perform, to not only do well and to achieve any performance evaluation goals, but to also fulfill your own goals for that matter. And so I think the very first starting point is around asking yourself, what are you doing right now to prepare so that when you start your internship, you will be successful? And so just the act of thinking through, well, how you're going to prepare, what you're going to focus on before you get started. Because the reality of it is, once you get started, internships are not a long time, 10 to 12 weeks on average. And so you don't necessarily have a lot of wiggle room once you get started. And so what can you do now to kind of think through how you can use this time to prepare so that you can be successful once you get started? And then certainly once you get started, there's plenty of other tips and tricks to really focus in on how to be successful while you're there. But I think that's a really good starting point.
Okay. Before going into, like, I was about to ask you about like do's and don'ts and stuff like that, but that's probably like after you actually go into your internship. But what are some of the things that you would, advise people to do before maybe jumping into that, like starting your internship? So like, you probably know that you probably accepted your internship offer, like I would say like March-ish. I'm just making this up. But like if you have about that 2 months period before going in there, what would be your advice to provide to those people who are going in with knowing where they will be in about like 8 weeks time?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's a number of places you can start. The framework that I tend to use with people as a good starting place is called the 3 R's. And it's 3 R's because it's literally 3 R's. The first R is going to be reflection. The second R is going to be research. And then the third R is going to be relationships. So let's start first with reflection. Reflection is all about really reflecting on your own goals and thinking about what you actually want to get out of this internship experience. There's a reason why you chose this opportunity, this company. And so making it clear to yourself why you chose it, but also what you want to get out of it is a really good starting place. On the research piece, this is really continuing on the research that most people have already probably done going through the recruiting process. But for example, if you are going to a company that works where you're working on some sort of product or service, being able to actually go and research more about what's happening with that product or service. Or if you're a product manager and you know the product you're going to be working on, how are you going in there and playing with the product, reading the reviews, getting more insight into what this product is and how it's being used? Certainly can doing research on the company and the culture, right? Knowing what that's going to be like, how to understand how you want to show up on day one and kind of engage and interact with your colleagues. And certainly anything you can find on the industry, like things like that. And those are all things that you can do even before you start to varying degrees, depending on what kind of role you're going into. And then last but not least is on relationships. Now, this is something that many people, again, have already gotten started with in terms of the networking and relationship building they've done through the recruiting process. But it doesn't stop there. How can you continue to kind of cultivate the relationships that you built? Because those people can still help you before you start, and certainly when you start, as well as also thinking more holistically about who are the types of people that you want to meet or continue to build relationships with. So you have a whole group of people that you can rely on once you get started on day one, even before it starts.
3R. No, that makes total sense. And I really love that framework. So let's say that you started your internship now. What are some of the do's and don'ts that you would, suggest people do and don't when they're in their internship?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to keep in mind. And I think the first thing that I would say is that being able to get clear on what the end goal is, as well as how you're going to be measured against that, I think is a very good starting place to start, right? Before you can really know what to do or how to focus, you kind of have to have an idea of what the end in mind is. Because no matter what you do, if you're doing things that don't accurately kind of map towards some kind of end goal or some kind of metric, no amount of doing is going to get you there, right? So I think the very first thing in terms of do, it really is around being able to kind of identify what those goals are and being able to really either write them down or get clear on them. Now, so I would kind of divide those goals into two pieces. One will be, external measures or external goals, and the other will be internal measures or internal goals. The external ones are going to be around kind of your performance evaluation and how you'll be evaluated for your role or for the projects that you're going to be working on. And so being able to kind of get clear on that, I think is a very good place to start, and being able to define that when you get started with your manager or supervisor. And then on the internal side, those are going to be yours. Those are going to be your reasons for what you want to get out of it and how you want to measure your own kind of success. Some of which will certainly be very aligned with external measures, but they might be slightly different as well. And I think it's important to delineate between the two because both are really important.
Yep.
So I think in terms of do's, I would say absolutely kind of define what those goals are externally as well as internally. And that's a really good place to start. I think the other thing that I would say in terms of a do is start really, once you get into the role, really make sure you're being thoughtful about how you go about building relationships. So I've done some research talking with and polling MBA alums who have gone through internships. And one of the questions I asked them is, if you were to advise an MBA intern on what they should focus on, where should they spend their time when they're getting started in a new role? And the number one thing out of all the different responses, by and large, farther than any other response that they could select, was around building the right relationships. And I think part of this just really speaks to the fact that, particularly working in larger organizations, so much of what you're doing relies on good relationships with other people. And so one of the other things that I would really encourage people to do is, like, once they get started, is really being intentional about thinking through, who do I want to build relationships with? And certainly getting feedback on that from your manager, supervisor, or peers. But that would be another do that I would really encourage people to really think about and focus on. And then the last one I would just say is around being able to truly understand what good looks like. What I mean by this is that it's really important to work hard. It's really important to do good work. But inevitably, that's defined at the company you stepped into is going to be less about what you think and more about what's already there and in place. So being able to really understand and see exactly what good looks like. So that way, when you do start working hard, when you do start thinking about how do I produce a good work product, you have a mental model and a framework for what to base it off of. And then you can kind of back your way into it. And so just a really tactical example of that is just really being able to just ask your manager or supervisor, hey, what's a great example of a great work product? Like, what does great look like? Or what does good look like? Or, if I were interning at Amazon, hey, what does a great six-page paper look like? Like, what does that look like? Right? Like, if I were to ask you a question of, do you think you would be able to write a great 6-page paper just on your own? Or do you think you would be able to write a great 6-page paper if you read 6 of those, evaluated the characteristics of what made them great, and then wrote it? I have an idea of what you would answer with. But it's kind of that notion of, when you're going into a new organization, you're probably going to need to rely on understanding what already exists before really jumping in and diving into the thing that you're going to do.
I think that makes sense. I thought about the first two ones, but I never really thought about the last one you mentioned about, like, what good looks like. And when you think about it, it's so obvious that, when people join your new team and stuff like that, you usually start by sharing some resources that you think are good. So I think that's where it really has to start. And, like, I think that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And in terms of some of the don'ts, maybe, do you have some of the don'ts that you would recommend people to not do?
Sure. It's a good one. In terms of don'ts, I would just say that don't get overwhelmed. And what I mean by that is, I know it's a lot easier said than done, but I think it's important to remember, you're there for a reason, right? You're there for a reason because the company believes in you, and they think you have the capabilities and the competencies to be successful. And so it's easier to say it as a do, but because it is in the do column, I think it's just a reminder that you belong where you are and that you have everything within you to be successful this summer. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do it all by yourself. But when I say don't get overwhelmed, it's really more just to have a sense of confidence that you have the ability to do exactly what the company selected you to be there for. And so I think it's just a reminder that particularly this is true if you are someone who is making a career transition or stepping into a new opportunity or new role or function that you didn't have experience in before. That's why I say, necessarily don't get overwhelmed. I think the other thing, just thinking about the relationship piece, is that I would really encourage you not to go on one of those never-ending coffee chat tours. And what I mean by that is that I do believe relationship building is one of the most important things you could focus your time on over the summer. But I really think it's important to be intentional about it. You will need to probably talk to many people, but you may not necessarily need to talk to all of the people in the same kinds of ways. There's probably going to be more people. There's people you need to focus on more than others. And so just going on that never ending, coffee chat tour, meeting the most amount of people, I find is probably not going to yield the most optimal outcome. It really is around, being intentional. And I think the other don't I would say, or thing to, perhaps avoid is I think the biggest takeaway would just be around being intentional and not going in just without some kind of plan. Inevitably, things will change and you'll need to shift. But I think better often than not to go in with some kind of intention versus just showing up on day one without any preparation or planning.
No, that makes total sense. And I think like a lot of the times what I usually tell people is like, whatever you do, you should have a purpose. And I think what exactly you were saying about, do's and don'ts is basically based on what your end goal is, like how you have to, because you have limited time, you have limited resource. What are you going to focus on? What are you going to, who are you going to focus on, building relationship and all that stuff? I think it makes total sense. One of the things that for me, as well as a lot of interns out there were interested or wanted to know about was like, how do I actually convert this internship to a full-time offer, right? And I was kind of wondering, like, I mean, obviously, doing the right things, do's and don'ts, and then things like that. But is there anything that you can actually give advice on people who are looking for that, transitioning from like a intern to a full-time offer?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just in terms of being able to, from the beginning, understand how you're evaluated, right? Because if you don't understand, it's kind of like studying for a test, right? If you don't understand what is going to be on the test, it's going to be really hard for you to figure out what to study in order to be successful. And if you don't understand what you're being evaluated on, that would enable you to get an offer, it's going to limit your ability to actually be successful in getting that offer. So I think the very first thing is to really understand what those criteria are about what you need to do to be able to kind of get that offer. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, and this may sound foundational, but I think it's important, being able to communicate that this is something that is important to you, to your manager or supervisor. Now, if you're going into a role or industry or function where that has a track record of always trying to convert summer interns to full-time, it might be baked in a little bit more into the expectation of just how it works. But even if that you are, I still think it's okay to have that conversation up front of saying, hey, this is important to me because A, I would love to be able to see myself here longer term, but B, I want to do great work and I take pride in my work. I think that's a conversation you need to have up front. But if you're not somewhere that necessarily has that, it makes it even more important to have that conversation to understand. And so I think that would be another thing that I would really encourage is to, regardless of whether you're in a place where this is common or where it's not, to have that conversation upfront with your manager. And then the third thing I would say is once you have the conversation, once you have that expectation, start tracking against that. And what I mean by that is certainly going out and doing great work in a way that helps you kind of put yourself in a position to be successful. But the other thing is like you should monitor it. So every week or every 2 weeks, write down the things you're doing that are getting you closer towards being in a position to get that offer. Review that with your manager to say, hey, here's how I'm doing. Is there anything that I'm missing? What else should I be doing in order to make sure that I'm on track? Or if you're getting feedback back that you're not, being able to action on that in ways to make sure that you do get back on track so that you can be successful. And then I would say the last thing, and a little bit the harder thing, but still important, and I still think can be done, is figuring out who the decision makers are in the process, right? If you know that certain people are going to be involved in making the decision around whether or not you're going to get an offer to return full time, it's important for you to then go out and talk to them and get to know them and build a relationship with them, so that when it's time for them to make that decision, that's not the first time they're finding out who you are. Right. And so being able to build that relationship and cultivate that, I think, is also something that someone can consider if they're trying to get an offer for full time.
Yeah. I especially like how you said, like, basically writing down or recording the things that you've been doing. Like, I personally did like daily journal kind of thing, like diary of like what I did on that day, like who I spoke to and all that stuff. So that definitely makes sense. On the contrary, there are a few people, or there will be people who are like, okay, this is not the place I want to be. I don't want to come back here full time. How do I get out of this place? Like, for those folks, like, is there anything that they should be doing? Like, let's say in the middle of the internship, like let's say week 6 or something out of their week 12 internship, they found out, hey, this is not the right place for me, and I really want to be in a different place full time. Is there any other will there be any advice for those people who feel that way?
Absolutely. Plenty of advice. So I would say the first thing is really getting to the root cause of what you think is causing you to think this. And by the way, if that happens to you, let me just say this: the internship worked, because the internship is meant to be a test run. And so the first thing I'll just say for this is that if that is the realization you come to, that is the exact purpose of an internship.
Mhm.
And thank God for that. So with that in mind, if you are someone who wants to figure out, okay, well, how do I make the best of this time? A couple options that you have. So first and foremost, I think it helps to name the thing. If you can really hone in on what it is about it that isn't a good fit for you, or what else you might be interested in, that is really good insight into how you can use the rest of your time over the summer and even beyond. If it is really if you really like the company, but it's just the role, well, then in theory, you could use the rest of your summer to meet other people in the company and to build relationships with them to see if there might be other opportunities that are there. The other thing that can be helpful is that if you know what the thing is, you can also look for other opportunities to get engaged and involved in the rest of the summer outside of your core responsibilities, to either get more experience that would help you build relationships at the company, or for things that you can use later on when you go back and re-recruit for second years. I have an amazing story about this from a student I worked with last summer, who she kind of had the situation you described. The internship wasn't exactly what she wanted it to be.
Mhm.
Her main project was not that interesting, but she realized there was more she wanted to get out of the experience. This was her first time working at a large organization, and
Mhm.
she thought she would probably end up at one after business school anyway. One area she was super passionate about was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so one of the things she did was she worked with her manager to get an additional project working with the DEI
Oh,
team
wow.
at the organization. And after the end of the summer, she actually did get the offer, but she turned it down. But now she works in consulting at a large consulting firm doing DE&I
Oh,
work.
wow.
And so the lesson there is that what she was able to do was she was able to take on another project or assignment, which gave her valuable experience. And she learned from that as well as she enjoyed it. And then she was able to talk about that in her interviews in the
Yeah.
fall, which landed her the next opportunity. And so that's a really great example of when you can get to the root cause of what's driving it, when you can figure out either what you don't want to do or maybe something you do want to do, when you can structure the rest of your internship in a way where you can get additional experiences, you increase your surface area and opportunity to get shots that can either lead to something in the moment or something that can be used down the road. And so there's plenty of things that you can do if it isn't what you want it to be. I think it starts though with thinking through, getting to that insight of what is really driving this and how can I use this to find another opportunity that I can then use to fuel my learning and growth.
That example is amazing. And yeah, no, like I saw a lot of people who are like, hey, I'm not really sure about my internship. I did get my offer, but I wasn't really sure. But like, just going through the process that you just mentioned, I think will help out people out there who's feeling the same way. One like last question is probably going to be like, any final thoughts or any final words or advice that you would give people who are going into their summer internship this summer or anytime in the future?
Yeah, I would just say that internships are short. And so you really want to make sure that you do two things. One, are as clear as you can be on what your own goals are out of the experience. And number two, that you hit the ground running. It really is important because they are such short experiences and you can absolutely get meaningful experiences out of them, but it does require you to be intentional and thoughtful. And then I would say just the other thing is just remember that in particular, the internship is 12 weeks out of your 2 years in business school. So it's important. It's an important 12 weeks, but it definitely doesn't define you. And if we take it as a snapshot over the course of the whole MBA experience, it's 12 weeks out of 18 months. And I always say that to keep this in perspective for how it goes either way, because there will be many more shots on goal and many more opportunities to continue learning and growing and figuring out how you want to continue to be successful throughout your career. And so it's just another thing of context to keep that in mind.
Awesome. Al, that was it for today. Thank you so much for everything. I especially love the 3R framework that you shared. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.